From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. The Israeli military has launched a series of strikes in the north of the Gaza Strip. They also sent reinforcements to the border with Gaza. Israel says this is a response to a Palestinian rocket which hit a house north of Tel Aviv. Palestinian officials in Gaza opened bomb shelters and evacuated schools and other public buildings ahead of the Israeli strikes. And the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is cutting short a trip to Washington. After a brief meeting with President Donald Trump, Netanyahu said he was returning to Israel to oversee the military operation. The Israeli military has sent 2 infantry divisions to southern Israel and is preparing to call up thousands of reservists. The move raises fears of a full-scale offensive against the Palestinian territory. The South African Development Community is holding a 2-day summit to discuss the Western Sahara conflict. Morocco has also called for a meeting on this issue. Our correspondent in Pretoria, Matuba Matlaji, explains.
The South African Development Community is gathering here in South Africa's capital, Pretoria, in a meeting, a 2-day meeting that's been called to focus on the pressing issue that is Western Sahara. Ironically, this event is taking place on the same day that Morocco also called a meeting on the same issue. Morocco has been feeling the pressure to give up its so-called illegal occupation of Western Sahara. Now, Southern African nations have decided to gather and focus on this matter, but Morocco has also invited other nations in what's been seen as a deflection of a very pressing matter to resolve the Western Sahara issue. And as you may know, that Morocco has fallen out with many countries on this very same issues, with South Africa just restoring its diplomatic ties in 2017 after a long spat over the liberation of Western Sahara from Morocco's illegal occupation. And now other countries like Mali, we hear, which are not part of the Southern African Development Community, have been invited to this this event in Morocco. And we also know that a Southern African nation, Malawi, which has just suffered massive damage because of the Idai cyclone, has also been invited to Morocco to attend that. And we also know that a Southern African nation, Malawi, which has just suffered massive damage because of the Idai cyclone, has also been invited to Morocco to attend that. And it seems Malawi will choose Morocco over its neighboring states in the SADC region to go and attend that meeting. And that's seen because of the pressure, the financial pressure that Malawi faces. And now it's a tit-for-tat kind of politics that Malawi will go to the Morocco meeting instead, so that it can get the financial assistance it needs to address its own domestic issues. But it remains to be seen what will come out of this 2-day meeting here in Pretoria, because the AU has also put a lot of pressure on resolving the Western Sahara issue, and the people of Western Sahara themselves have been calling for independence from Morocco for a while, also calling for the release of dissidents that are arrested in Morocco, because Morocco has been clamping down on any different voice that speaks of independence. But here in Pretoria, it's a wait-and-see situation to see what the heads of states in the Southern African Development Community have come to the kind of conclusion they have come to on this very sensitive matter on the African continent. It's back to you, studio.
Thank you, Matuba. That was Matuba Matlaji from South Africa. And in other stories, the government in Mali has nominated a new chief of military after gunmen killed at least 134 people on Sunday. 2 generals have also been replaced. The Minister of Justice visited the survivors at the hospital. Fulani herders were targeted in the deadliest attack in central Mali, fueled by ethnic and religious violence. Children and women were among the victims.
The President called an emergency meeting of the Council of Ministers today to take a certain number of decisions relating to the violent developments of the security situation. Thus, we have proceeded with the dissolution of the Dan Na Amasogo Association. Taking into account the protection of population remains the responsibility of the state.
And international aid continues to pour into Beira, Mozambique, after it was ravaged by Cyclone Idai. The death toll in the South African country stands at 400, but it's expected to rise as search and rescue efforts continue. Thousands remain displaced.
We managed to get a bit more than 2,000 people from Buzi to here, out of the worst affected areas, with small fishing boats, because unfortunately where they are, the bigger boats that we have here in the port, they cannot reach there. We have in the port at the moment the Indian Navy with a hospital ship, and they have put a mobile team here to help the people that come there from Buzi.
Meanwhile, the Lands and Environmental Minister announced that it's too early to say there's a cholera outbreak in the affected region.
It's early to say that it's cholera. We have a lot of diarrhea, but teams are working on the ground to say if it's really cholera or not. But as I said, there'll be cholera. That's why the government is putting, there will be. The government is putting a prevention and treatment center specific for cholera in the districts affected.
Results from Sunday's local election in Ecuador continue to be processed. Nearly 6,000 officials were chosen, who will take office on May 14th. The Electoral Council has announced they will release the official results on Monday.
A new report of the National Electoral Council recently reported that approximately the 80% of the votes have been counted, and Jorge Yunda, the candidate of the Ecuadorian Union Party, is leading the polls for mayor of Quito, and Paola Pavón, the candidate of Social Commitment, is leading the polls for prefect of Pichincha. Also, on the Ecuadorian coast, the candidate of the Social Christian Party, Cynthia Viteri, is leading the polls. Also, during these elections, a number of irregularities were reported on social media, where citizens and voters criticized the National Electoral Council website, and also in different parts and provinces of the Ecuadorian coast, like Esmeraldas, Manabí, and El Oro. People reported that incidents occurred there, and the result of these incidents were wanted people and ballot boxes were burned. So is the results of the local election in Ecuador. Now it is expected a new report of the National Electoral Council authorities, and we will update any information as soon as we can.
Thank you, Denise. That was Denise Herrera, correspondent in Quito. And the main political parties heading to the polls in Thailand on Sunday have said they will form a government, although official results are yet to be released. Preliminary results released on Sunday gave the ruling party the win, but the opposition is leading the winning parliament seats. Official results will be announced on May 9th. These have been the first elections since the military coup in 2014. Following presidential elections on Sunday, police in Comoros have dispersed hundreds of opposition protesters, leaving 2 injured. The main opposition party had alleged irregularities by the Electoral Commission on Sunday's polls. They call this a coup d'etat and call for public resistance. According to officials, dozens of booths had been vandalized during the elections. Opinion polls so far indicate a landslide victory for incumbent President Azali Assoumani. On Saturday, Prime Minister of the St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Ralph Gonsalves, spoke to media in Barbados and said that the leaders who met with the U.S. President cannot speak for CARICOM regarding its stance on Venezuela, which is non-intervention and non-interference. He also warned of efforts to divide CARICOM.
It emphasized the principles of non-intervention and non-interference in the internal affairs of Venezuela. That you must not, no country must threaten the use of force is contrary to the Charter of the United Nations also, and to international law generally. That CARICOM reaffirmed its commitment to the values of democracy and human rights, and that we believe that we could contribute towards a resolution of the problems in Venezuela by having a position whereby we will have conversations with all contending forces that might end up with an election, a referendum, or any other agreed mechanism under the Constitution.
Sunday marked 43 years since the U.S.-backed military coup in Argentina, during which time about 30,000 people were arrested and disappeared. Large concentrations took place in the historic Plaza de Mayo under the slogan "Memory and Unity."
Marchers took to the streets of Buenos Aires with a large flag showing the names and pictures of those who disappeared during the military dictatorship in Argentina. Accompanied by a sea of people, the mothers and grandmothers of the Plaza de Mayo displayed their usual white handkerchiefs and led the massive march.
They have to stop that mistreatment. The government cannot turn its back on the people. The government is afraid of us because we keep resisting.
Today we march to remember the 3,000 missing and to say we don't want coups, neither in Argentina nor in Latin America. We want to tell the United States to come out from our lands.
The streets of Buenos Aires became a place to look back at history. Human rights organizations, along with thousands of people, remembered the victims of the last dictatorship under the slogan, "With memory and unity, we'll fight for the nation we dream about and for the 30,000.
The hope of all those who resisted and fought remains at the Plaza de Mayo, and the hope of all people from Latin America, I believe. We see the 1976 coup as an act of imperialist hatred, and our fight is the resistance.
The march arrived to the historic Plaza de Mayo, where a document was read to reiterate the people's continued fight and to say that the horrors of the past will not be allowed to happen again.
We are still here. We are here just like every 24th of March. Our main thought is for our sons and for the 30,000 missing. We reject the genocide that took place in the 70s, and we completely reject the government of Mauricio Macri for the human rights violation it currently carries out.
Marchers commemorated the fight for the 30,000 missing who were victims of state terrorism between 1976 and 1983. They say once again that they will not forget and they will not forgive, on the face of a government that has tried to erase this memory.
We'll take a short break now. Don't go away.
Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life of the whole South America on our screen and platform in English. A critical place committed to the truth to determine the major events that transform the world today. On Monday, only on Venezuela.
Welcome back. 8 indigenous people were killed in an explosion in Colombia last week as they prepared to receive campesino, indigenous and Afro-descendant people taking part in a protest.
Members of the Indigenous Guard, a group formed by indigenous people of all ages, said goodbye to the victims of an explosion in the Cauca Valley.
When the Minga was taking place, the Indigenous Guard gathered to receive members of indigenous and campesino communities taking part. It's in that moment that they are attacked and killed.
According to Alex Fernandez, human rights counselor for the Indigenous Guard, both this incident and the defense minister's statement regarding it have to be rejected.
At first, when the police and the public prosecutor arrived to the area, they were told to coordinate with the Indigenous Guard to verify the situation and identify the bodies. But they told the media that the situation was mishandled and that information was manipulated from our part. That is when the National Guard stops collaborating with their investigation.
Authorities and members of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace continue to investigate the tragedy.
The government has also called on international organizations to help with the investigation.
It was an attack at 10 in the morning. There were strong clashes with armed groups. Then, there were also drones flying around the area, and there was military presence. So what we think is that all the evidences point out to an attack to sabotage the Minga, our protest.
People who joined to continue the protest said that the statement released by the government against the protest is aimed at breaking up the demonstrations.
They do this not to give an answer to the demands of indigenous people and not to respect their rights. The government is not respecting the agreement reached during the last demonstrations.
While people are still grieving over the death of 8 indigenous people, the Guard has said they will keep on protesting to demand peace in their territories and the fulfillment of the agreements reached with the government since 1991.
Former coca farmers in Colombia are considering whether to resume the growing of the illegal crops, as the government has failed to implement a crop substitution plan. Ensuring such a plan was a key aspect of the peace deal with the FARC signed in 2016. The plan aimed at replacing illegal crops with other crops such as banana, coffee or cacao in exchange for cash incentives. More than 2 years have passed and many coca growers say that payments have been intermittent or non-existent.
Now, I understand that those who didn't want to sign the agreement are those that may give us food, because if the state doesn't respect its commitments, they will have to give us food.
Because we still have bank loans and we have the plan that gives us food, whereas those who ripped out the plans are without money and without food.
A large fire destroyed a favela in Sao Paulo, Brazil, on the eve of a planned forced eviction of those living there. No one was hurt in the fire, which engulfed the entire settlement. Some 200 people, including almost 70 children, had been living in the cement favela since 2013, which was named after an abandoned cement factory nearby. Experts in Brazil still don't know the extent of the pollution in rivers affected after a dam belonging to the Vale mining company burst, killing nearly 300 people. Water is still reddish-brown in many rivers in the state of Minas Gerais. This is despite the analysis conducted by the government and the mining company, which showed low toxicity levels. Environmental groups say that their water quality analysis shows there are high levels of toxic waste in key waterways.
The tailings of the dam, even though some have been returned further down, are still slowly passing through down to here in Felixande, more than 200 kilometers away from where the dam broke, and is impacting the ecosystem directly.
Almost 26 million people in Mexico identify themselves as indigenous. However, official data shows that they remain one of the most vulnerable and discriminated groups in the country.
It took some time for Delfino Carrillo, a member of the Huichol indigenous community, to adapt to his new life in Mexico City. He makes a living from selling artisanal handicrafts, but he misses his old life in the countryside.
I like living in the countryside. I have my roots there, my family, my brothers and other relatives. I preferred living there, but because of work, I had to move to the city.
His artistic talent and the cultural heritage he received from his parents and grandparents have served him little in the capital.
I dress in the traditional clothes of the Huichol people, but city people looked down on me, made fun of me, and told me I cannot dress like this here. To be honest, this made me feel bad.
This harsh reality is common. According to the National Institute of Statistics, at least 40% of indigenous people say they've been discriminated against because of their skin color, or how they speak, clothing, and even their religious beliefs.
This shows that all these laws regarding multiculturalism don't show the everyday reality of indigenous people. Laws and treaties talk about the issue. They exist on paper to show that there is development and progress, but the reality is that they are not enforced. They don't respect diversity.
Official data also shows that about 10% of the population identifies as indigenous. About 7.2 million of them speak an indigenous language. It's a sector of society that has historically been forgotten by the government. However, the government of Andrés Manuel López Obrador says it's committed to changing this.
Nobody is concerned about the serious damage neoliberal policies have had on our people. The destruction of our lands, territories, and natural resources, the growing violence, and the breakdown of our society.
Numbers also reveal that 7 out of 10 indigenous people in Mexico continue to live in poverty, mostly in remote areas, where there's little access to public health, education, and housing services.
Archaeologists in Mexico have discovered a rich treasure of Aztec artifacts, including a jaguar dressed as a warrior. The discovery may point to the possible discovery of Aztec emperor's tomb for the first time. The offerings were discovered at the Templo Mayor located in Mexico City. They also include a boy dressed as the Aztec war god. The offerings were deposited over 500 years ago in the front of the temple. An indigenous Mayan woman has participated for the first time in the Marathon of Los Angeles. Guatemalan woman Maria del Carmen Tuncho is the first to run in one of the most important athletic events in the United States. She ran with her sandals and her traditional dress while carrying her country's flag. She finished the 42-kilometer marathon in 4 hours and 47 minutes. More stories coming up. We'll be back.
The life is full of moments. Moments of fight. Moments of hope. Moments that transcend. Moments that you can live in. Telesur documentaries. Sundays. Only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Flash floods have killed at least 17 people and injured over 70 in southern Iran. Authorities said the flooding has been under control and emergency work is underway. Iranian state TV reported most of the people killed had been trying to film the flooding with their phones. In recent days, heavy rains triggered flooding across the country, with more than 56,000 people being affected. A pilot in Botswana has died after intentionally crashing his aircraft into a clubhouse. He had allegedly been involved in an altercation at the venue. Witnesses said the pilot, who was attending a baby shower, was chased away from the venue after he assaulted his wife. Authorities said there were no injuries or deaths beside the pilots, as the building was evacuated just before the aircraft hit. Serbia has marked 20 years since NATO airstrikes forced Belgrade to withdraw its troops from Kosovo. This ended a conflict that claimed more than 13,000 lives. The Serbian president said on Sunday that NATO committed a crime, and yet no one has been prosecuted for it. NATO bombed Serbia and Montenegro for 78 days straight, starting on March 24, 1999.
The death of 2,500 civilians, including 79 children, the devastation of the country, damage estimated at tens of billions of dollars, will always be a crime for us. For them, it was a mistake, if they even make an effort to recognize it. A mistake they sometimes call tragic.
A Kenyan teacher from a remote village has won the $1 million Global Teacher Prize. Peter Tabichi teaches science in a community where almost a third of children are orphans. There, drought and famine are common. He is credited with helping many stay in school, go on to college, and qualify for international competitions in science. Tabichi said he plans to use his prize money to feed the poor and improve the school, like building a library and a laboratory. People in El Salvador have paid tribute to Monsignor Oscar Romero on the 39th anniversary of his death. Romero was murdered during the Civil War at the hands of a death squad. Last year, he was canonized, becoming the first saint from El Salvador.
A mass was held in the Divina Providencia Church, the same place where Monsignor Oscar Romero was murdered in 1980. Almost 4 decades after his brutal killing, his murderers still haven't been sentenced.
We are happy that he is the first person in El Salvador to be canonized, but we are also very worried about the judicial process of the country, because it is at a standstill, it's not making any progress. The case of Monsignor Romero is still open. Judge Rigoberto Chicas is in charge of it. The family of Monsignor Romero has the right to know the truth.
The civil war in El Salvador began the same year Oscar Romero was murdered. Romero always denounced the powerful class and the abuses by army, forced disappearances, and human rights violations. He was known as the voice of the voiceless.
Through his faith and his great commitment to the people, he knew very well the importance of the church and a true priest. He was always with the people in their struggles and sufferings.
Worshippers took part in the pilgrimage to his tomb. Former combatants also pay tribute to him. They remember Monsignor Romero as their spiritual guide.
Me and a group of combatants were very close to him during the armed conflict. He was killed, but we never stopped worshipping him. He hasn't died. He's still alive for us, alive in the social causes he fought for, against social injustices, and for those who are forgotten by the people in power.
The legacy of Monsignor Oscar Romero continues to strengthen the social struggles of people even 39 years after his murder.
And with that, we end our news brief, but you can find these and more stories by going to our website, telesur-english.net. For our viewers in Africa, you can find us on Starsat channel 461 in South Africa and channel 539 in Nigeria. And you can join us on social media as well. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.